The first light of dawn painted the sky above London in soft shades of pink and gold. The city was still quiet but not asleep. People had been camping on the streets since midnight to get the best spots to watch the royal procession. Prince William opened his eyes in his private room at Buckingham Palace. He had slept only a few hours but felt wide awake with excitement and nerves. The Prince of Wales sat up in his bed and looked out the tall windows. He could see the crowds already gathering in the distance. Thousands of people were making their way to the streets that would soon be filled with royal carriages and horses. Some carried British flags while others had brought folding chairs and picnic baskets. Children ran between the adults while their parents set up small camps on the sidewalks. William walked to his bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. Today was going to be one of the most important days in recent royal history. The coronation ceremony would bring together people from all over the world to witness an event that happened only once in a generation. He thought about his 3 children, who would be watching from special seats in Westminster Abbey. They had been practicing their royal behavior for weeks. His valet knocked softly on the door and entered with a perfectly pressed navy blue uniform. The ceremonial outfit was covered with golden buttons and colorful ribbons that told the story of British military history. Each medal and badge had been polished until it shined like a mirror. William ran his fingers over the fabric and remembered wearing similar uniforms during his own military service years ago. The palace kitchen had prepared a light breakfast, but William could barely eat. His stomach was filled with butterflies as he thought about the millions of people who would be watching on television around the world. He sipped his tea and tried to stay calm. His wife Catherine had already left earlier to take their children to the abbey and make sure they were settled in their seats before the ceremony began. Outside his window, the noise was getting louder. More people were arriving every minute. Street vendors were selling royal souvenirs and newspapers with special coronation editions. Police officers on horses were making their way through the crowds to check that everyone was safe and happy. The atmosphere was like a giant celebration that had taken over the entire city. William put on his uniform piece by piece. First came the crisp white shirt and perfectly tied black tie. Then the heavy jacket with its rows of medals and colorful sashes. Each piece of clothing had been made specially for this day by the finest tailors in London. The prince looked at himself in the full-length mirror and saw not just a man getting dressed, but a symbol of centuries of British tradition. His private secretary appeared at the door with the final schedule for the day. There would be the carriage ride through London streets, followed by the long ceremony in Westminster Abbey. After that came the traditional balcony appearance, where the royal family would wave to the crowds below. Every minute was planned down to the smallest detail. The prince thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had attended so many of these ceremonies during her long reign. She had always told him that the most important thing was to remember that these events were not about the royal family, but about the people who came to celebrate with them. The crowds outside were not there to see fancy clothes or expensive carriages. They came because these moments brought the whole country together. William took one last look in the mirror and straightened his shoulders. He was ready to play his part in this historic day. The butterflies in his stomach had turned into excitement. Soon, he would join his family, and together, they would give the British people a day they would never forget. The coronation was about to begin, and Prince William was ready to make his royal ancestors proud. Princess Anne stood in front of her bedroom mirror at 7 in the morning. She had been awake since 5:30, but that was normal for her. The Princess Royal was famous for being the hardest-working member of the royal family. She attended more events and meetings than anyone else and never complained about being tired. Her room was neat and organized just like everything else in her life. There were no fancy decorations or expensive paintings on the walls. Princess Anne preferred simple things that served a purpose. On her dresser sat a single photograph of her late father, Prince Philip, in his naval uniform. She touched the frame gently and smiled. He would have been proud to see this day. The Princess Royal began getting ready with the same careful attention she gave to everything. First, she brushed her gray hair back into her usual simple style. She had never been interested in fancy hairstyles or following fashion trends. Her approach to royal duties was practical and no nonsense. People respected her because she always kept her word and worked harder than anyone expected. Her lady-in-waiting brought in the special outfit that had been chosen for the coronation. It was a beautiful navy blue coat with gold buttons and a matching hat. The fabric was the finest wool and had been made by British craftsmen. Princess Anne examined every detail to make sure it was perfect. She knew that millions of people would be watching, and everything had to be exactly right. As she got dressed, Princess Anne thought about all the coronations and state ceremonies she had attended over the years. She had seen kings and queens crowned in countries around the world. She had walked behind coffins of world leaders and celebrated with presidents and prime ministers. Each event had taught her something about duty and service to others. The Princess Royal put on her white gloves and adjusted her hat in the mirror. She looked like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. There was something calming about her presence that made other people feel safe and confident. Even in the most stressful situations, Princess Anne never seemed worried or upset. Her equerry knocked on the door and told her it was time to review the schedule one more time. Princess Anne was famous for being perfectly prepared for every event. She knew exactly where she needed to be at every moment of the day. She had studied the coronation program until she could recite it from memory. Looking out her window, she could see the crowds getting bigger and bigger. People were singing songs and waving flags. Children were sitting on their fathers' shoulders to get a better view. The excitement in the air was something she could feel even from inside the palace walls. Princess Anne had attended her mother's coronation as a young girl many years ago. She remembered how magical it had seemed then. Now, as an adult, she understood that these ceremonies were about much more than crowns and fancy clothes. They were about bringing the whole country together and celebrating the things that made Britain special. She picked up her small handbag and checked that she had everything she needed. A handkerchief, a small comb, and some mints were all she ever carried. Princess Anne did not believe in carrying things she did not need. Everything in her life had a purpose and a place. The Princess Royal took one last look in the mirror and nodded with satisfaction. She was ready to do her duty once again. Today would be another chapter in her long story of service to the British people. She walked toward the door, knowing that she would play her part perfectly, just as she always did. The grand entrance hall of Buckingham Palace was filled with nervous energy as members of the royal family gathered before leaving for Westminster Abbey. The huge room, with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers, had seen many historic moments, but today felt extra special. Footmen in red uniforms hurried back and forth making final preparations, while family members checked their appearance one last time. Prince William walked down the main staircase looking magnificent in his ceremonial uniform. The morning sun streaming through the tall windows made his medals sparkle like diamonds. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this role of his entire life. Other family members nodded respectfully as he passed, but there was also warmth in their greetings. Princess Anne entered the hall from another doorway, at exactly the same moment. She had timed her arrival perfectly, as she always did. The Princess Royal never kept people waiting, and she never arrived late to anything. Her navy blue coat looked elegant and proper, while her hat sat at just the right angle. She carried herself with the dignity that came from 50 years of royal duties. When Prince William saw his aunt across the room, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. He walked toward her with quick steps, and she met him halfway. Their greeting was formal at first, with a proper bow and curtsy, but then their faces broke into real smiles. Princess Anne reached up and straightened one of the ribbons on his uniform jacket. The Princess Royal and her nephew had grown much closer over the years. When William was younger, he had sometimes seemed a little afraid of his serious aunt. Now he understood that her stern exterior hid a warm heart and a sharp sense of humor. Princess Anne had watched him grow from a playful boy into a responsible father and future king. They stood together talking quietly while other family members gathered around them. Princess Anne asked about his children and whether they were nervous about sitting through the long ceremony. William laughed and said that his youngest had been practicing sitting still for weeks, but might not last the entire service. His aunt smiled and remembered her own children at that age. The Princess Royal gave William some last-minute advice about the carriage ride through London. She reminded him to pace his waves to the crowd so his arm would not get tired. She also suggested he look for the children in the crowd because their excitement always made her smile during long public events. William listened carefully because he knew his aunt had more experience with these occasions than almost anyone alive. Other family members joined their conversation, and the entrance hall became filled with quiet chatter. Everyone was checking details and making sure they knew exactly what would happen next. The younger royals looked to Princess Anne and Prince William for guidance. Both of them had a calming effect on the group. A palace official announced that it was time to move to the carriages. The family began walking toward the main doors where their transportation was waiting outside. Prince William and Princess Anne walked side by side, continuing their conversation. She was telling him about her first major state ceremony and how nervous she had been. As they reached the entrance, Prince William paused and looked around at his family. These were the people who understood the weight of royal duty and the importance of serving the British people. Princess Anne placed her hand gently on his arm and nodded toward the door. It was time to begin their journey to Westminster Abbey. The large doors opened and bright sunlight flooded into the entrance hall. Outside, they could hear the sounds of horses and carriages being prepared. The crowds lining the streets were already cheering, even though they could not yet see the royal family. Prince William took a deep breath and stepped forward with Princess Anne beside him. Together, they would represent the best traditions of the British royal family on this historic day. The golden carriage rolled smoothly along the ancient cobblestone streets of London as thousands of people lined both sides of the route. Prince William sat inside the ornate vehicle, feeling the gentle swaying motion as the horses clip-clopped their way toward Westminster Abbey. Through the large windows, he could see faces pressed against the barriers, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. The carriage was a masterpiece of British craftsmanship with its gold decorations and red velvet interior. It had been used by kings and queens for over 200 years, and every inch of it gleamed in the morning sunlight. The horses pulling it were magnificent black animals with flowing manes and perfectly polished harnesses. Their riders wore bright red uniforms and sat as straight as soldiers on parade. Prince William waved to the crowds with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. But today felt different from all the other royal processions he had taken part in. The people seemed more excited and more emotional than usual. Many were crying with joy, while others were singing the national anthem. Children were being held up by their parents to get a better view over the heads of the adults. Behind him, in another equally beautiful carriage, rode Princess Anne. The Princess Royal sat with perfect posture, looking out at the crowds with interest and pleasure. She had taken part in royal processions in dozens of countries around the world, but she never got tired of seeing how happy these events made ordinary people. Her carriage was decorated with flowers that had been picked fresh that morning from the royal gardens. The streets of London had been transformed for the occasion. Every building was draped with red, white, and blue bunting that fluttered in the gentle breeze. Shop windows displayed pictures of the royal family alongside British flags and messages of celebration. Even the street lamps had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by local residents who wanted to show their patriotic spirit. Prince William could hear the crowds cheering long before his carriage came into view. The sound rolled ahead of the procession like a wave of excitement. When people finally saw him approaching, the noise became almost deafening. Thousands of voices were calling out greetings and good wishes, while camera phones flashed like tiny stars in the daylight. The prince made sure to look toward both sides of the street so that everyone felt included in the celebration. He had learned from his grandmother that royal waves should be slow and deliberate so that people had time to wave back. When he spotted children in the crowd, he made special effort to smile and wave directly at them. Their faces would light up with pure joy and excitement. Princess Anne in her carriage was doing exactly the same thing. The Princess Royal had developed her own style of connecting with crowds over the decades. She would nod acknowledgement to older people who had clearly waited for hours to see the procession. When she saw military veterans wearing their medals, she would give them a special salute that showed her respect for their service. The horses moved at a steady pace that allowed people plenty of time to see the royal family, but kept the procession moving toward its destination. Police officers on motorcycles rode alongside the carriages while mounted police cleared the way ahead. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail to ensure the safety and comfort of both the royals and the spectators. As the procession turned onto the final street leading to Westminster Abbey, the crowds became even thicker. People had climbed onto rooftops and hung out of windows to get the best possible view. The ancient abbey came into sight with its twin towers reaching toward the sky like fingers pointing to heaven. Prince William felt his heart beat faster as he realized that in just a few minutes he would be inside that historic building taking part in one of the most important ceremonies in British history. The carriage began to slow down as it approached the abbey entrance. Prince William could see the red carpet that had been rolled out for the royal family and the honor guard of soldiers standing at attention. Everything was ready for their arrival and for the ceremony that would follow. Westminster Abbey rose before them like a giant stone prayer book written in architecture. The ancient building had witnessed the coronations of kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years. Its Gothic towers and carved stone walls had seen the most important moments in British history. Today it would add another chapter to that long and glorious story. Prince William stepped out of his carriage and onto the red carpet that led to the abbey entrance. The sound of the crowds outside seemed to fade away as he approached the massive wooden doors. Inside, he could hear the organ playing softly and the voices of the choir practicing their hymns. The prince took a deep breath and prepared to enter one of the most sacred spaces in all of Britain. The interior of Westminster Abbey was breathtaking in its beauty and grandeur. Tall stone columns reached up toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the sky itself. Stained glass windows threw patterns of colored light across the ancient floor where kings and queens had walked for centuries. Every surface was decorated with carvings and monuments that told the story of British history. Prince William walked slowly down the long center aisle toward his designated seat. On both sides of him sat hundreds of distinguished guests who had come from around the world to witness this historic ceremony. There were presidents and prime ministers, religious leaders, and military commanders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens who had been chosen to represent the British people. Princess Anne entered the abbey a few minutes after her nephew and made her way to her own seat with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything. The Princess Royal had attended ceremonies like this in cathedrals and palaces around the world, but Westminster Abbey always felt special to her. This was where her parents had been married and where she herself had celebrated many of the most important moments of her life. The ancient ceremony began with prayers and hymns that had been sung at coronations for hundreds of years. Prince William joined in with the responses, knowing that he was taking part in traditions that connected him to every monarch who had come before. The words echoed off the stone walls and seemed to carry the weight of centuries of history. As the ceremony continued, Prince William found himself deeply moved by the solemnity and beauty of the occasion. The Archbishop spoke about duty and service to others, while the choir sang hymns that made everyone in the abbey feel they were witnessing something truly sacred. Even people who rarely went to church found themselves touched by the spiritual atmosphere. Princess Anne sat with perfect posture throughout the long service, but her eyes showed how much the ceremony meant to her. She had devoted her entire adult life to serving the British people and understood better than most what it meant to put duty before personal desires. Today she was witnessing the continuation of traditions that gave meaning and stability to the nation. The most moving moment came when the new monarch was presented with the ancient symbols of royal authority. The crown that was placed on the royal head had been worn by kings and queens for generations. The scepter and orb represented the responsibility to rule with wisdom and justice. Prince William watched with deep respect as these sacred objects were handled with the reverence they deserved. Throughout the ceremony, television cameras captured every moment for the millions of people watching around the world. But inside the abbey, it felt like the outside world had disappeared completely. There was only the ancient ritual and the feeling that everyone present was part of something much larger than themselves. As the ceremony neared its end, Prince William reflected on what he had witnessed. The coronation was not just about crowning a new monarch, but about renewing the promises that bound the royal family to the people they served. It was about continuing traditions that had helped Britain through wars and celebrations, triumphs and tragedies. The final hymn filled the abbey with voices raised in celebration and thanksgiving. Prince William and Princess Anne joined in with hearts full of pride for their country and their royal family. They knew that this day would be remembered for generations to come as a moment when Britain showed the world the beauty and dignity of its ancient traditions. During a quiet moment between the formal parts of the ceremony, something beautiful happened that television cameras were lucky enough to capture. Prince William and Princess Anne were standing side by side waiting for the next part of the service to begin when the Princess Royal leaned slightly toward her nephew. She whispered something in his ear that made his serious expression suddenly change into a genuine smile. Nobody else could hear what Princess Anne had said, but her words seemed to relax Prince William completely. The tension that had been showing in his shoulders disappeared, and he looked like a nephew sharing a private joke with his favorite aunt rather than a future king at a state ceremony. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but it showed the world that underneath all the formality, the royal family had the same warm relationships that any family might have. Princess Anne had always been known for her dry sense of humor and her ability to say exactly the right thing at the right moment. Over the years, she had become one of Prince William's most trusted advisors because she never sugar-coated her opinions and always told him the truth. Today, her whispered comments seemed to remind him that despite all the pageantry and protocol, this was still a family celebration. When the newly crowned monarch began the slow procession through Westminster Abbey, both Prince William and Princess Anne stepped forward to offer their respects. Their bows were perfectly timed and exactly the right depth to show their understanding of royal protocol. But there was nothing mechanical about their gestures. The respect they showed came from genuine love and admiration. Princess Anne's curtsy was a masterpiece of royal etiquette that came from 50 years of practice at state occasions. She lowered her head at exactly the right angle and held the position for precisely the right amount of time. But when she raised her eyes, there was a warmth there that showed this was not just duty but affection for a family member she had watched grow up. Prince William's bow was equally perfect, but in a different way. As a future king himself, he had to show respect while also maintaining his own dignity and authority. The way he moved showed that he understood the delicate balance between personal relationships and constitutional roles. His bow honored tradition while also looking forward to his own future responsibilities. During another part of the ceremony, the royal family members were required to move to different positions in the abbey. As they walked past each other, Prince William and Princess Anne exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their relationship. There was pride in Princess Anne's eyes as she watched her nephew handle himself with such grace and confidence. Prince William seemed to draw strength from his aunt's presence throughout the long ceremony. Several times he glanced in her direction, and each time she gave him a small nod of encouragement. Princess Anne had attended more state occasions than any other member of the royal family, and her experience showed in the way she seemed completely comfortable with every aspect of the formal proceedings. The cameras also captured a touching moment when Prince William looked toward the section where his children were sitting with their mother, Catherine. His face softened with pure parental love as he saw them trying their best to sit still and behave properly during the long service. Princess Anne followed his gaze and smiled when she saw the youngest royal struggling not to fidget. Later in the ceremony, when the choir sang an especially moving hymn, both Prince William and Princess Anne seemed deeply affected by the music. They stood close together, sharing the emotional impact of the moment. The Princess Royal reached out and gently touched her nephew's arm in a gesture of comfort and connection that showed how much their relationship meant to both of them. These small human moments within the grand ceremony reminded everyone watching that the royal family was made up of real people with real feelings and relationships. The formal titles and ceremonial roles were important, but underneath them were the same bonds of love and support that connect all families during important life events. As the ceremony continued, Prince William and Princess Anne maintained their perfect public behavior, while still finding ways to support and encourage each other. Their example showed how duty and love could work together to create something beautiful and meaningful for everyone to witness. The famous balcony at Buckingham Palace had been the setting for countless historic moments over the past century. From royal weddings to victory celebrations, this small outdoor platform had provided the stage for some of the most memorable images in British history. Today it would once again become the focal point for millions of people around the world as the royal family gathered to acknowledge the crowds below. Prince William climbed the stairs inside the palace toward the balcony with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The long ceremony at Westminster Abbey had been emotionally draining, but also deeply satisfying. Now came the part of the day that he had been both looking forward to and slightly dreading. The balcony appearance was always unpredictable because nobody could control how the crowds would react. Princess Anne was already waiting near the balcony doors when Prince William arrived. The Princess Royal had changed out of her ceremonial coat into a slightly lighter outfit, but still looked every inch the professional royal. She was speaking quietly with other family members and making sure everyone knew exactly where they should stand and when they should wave to the crowds. The roar from outside was incredible. Thousands of people had gathered in front of Buckingham Palace, and their excitement could be felt even through the thick palace walls. They had been waiting for hours in the hot sunshine, just for this moment when the royal family would appear on the balcony. Many were singing patriotic songs, while others were simply cheering at the top of their voices. When the balcony doors opened, the sound hit the royal family like a wave of pure joy and celebration. Prince William stepped forward first, and the crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. People were jumping up and down, waving flags, and calling out greetings. The prince raised his hand to wave, and the cheering became even louder if that was possible. Princess Anne followed her nephew onto the balcony and received an equally enthusiastic welcome from the crowd. The Princess Royal was genuinely popular with the British people, who respected her decades of hard work and dedication. She waved with the practiced ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times, but her smile showed that she never got tired of connecting with the public. The other family members joined them on the balcony, creating a tableau that photographers around the world were frantically trying to capture. Prince William stood tall and confident in the center, while Princess Anne took her position slightly to one side. Both of them waved continuously to different sections of the crowd, making sure that everyone felt acknowledged and included. The afternoon sun was shining brightly, making everyone on the balcony squint slightly as they looked down at the sea of faces below. But the light also made their ceremonial clothes sparkle and created the perfect conditions for the historic photographs that would appear in newspapers and magazines around the world. Every camera angle seemed to capture something magical about the moment. Prince William found himself genuinely moved by the enthusiasm of the crowd. These were ordinary people who had given up their day off to come and celebrate with the royal family. Many had traveled long distances and spent their own money just to be part of this historic occasion. Their dedication and loyalty was something that never failed to humble them. Princess Anne was equally touched by the crowd's response. She had attended royal balcony appearances for over 50 years, but each one still amazed her. The connection between the royal family and the British people was something special that existed nowhere else in the world. These moments on the balcony were when that connection was most visible and most powerful. The waving continued for nearly 15 minutes as the royal family made sure to acknowledge every section of the crowd. Prince William and Princess Anne worked together like a well-rehearsed team, taking turns to wave to different areas and making sure their energy never flagged. Their professionalism made the whole event look effortless, even though they were both tired from the long day. As the balcony appearance neared its end, Prince William took a moment to look around at his family members standing beside him. Princess Anne caught his eye and gave him a small nod of approval that said everything about how proud she was of the way he had handled himself throughout the day. Together, they had given the British people a perfect ending to a perfect coronation celebration. Away from the television cameras and newspaper photographers, the real character of Prince William and Princess Anne became even more evident during the private reception that followed the public ceremonies. The state rooms of Buckingham Palace were filled with distinguished guests who had traveled from around the world to witness the historic coronation. But it was in these quieter moments that the true personalities of the royal family members really shone through. Prince William moved through the reception rooms with the same natural charm that had made him popular with the British people since childhood. Palace staff members who had worked behind the scenes all day were amazed when the prince made a point of personally thanking each and every one of them. From the most senior officials who had planned the ceremony to the youngest pages who had carried ceremonial objects, everyone received the same genuine appreciation. The prince spent several minutes talking to the team of seamstresses who had worked for months preparing the ceremonial uniforms and formal dresses. He asked about their families and remembered details from conversations he had with them during earlier fittings. This personal touch was something that distinguished Prince William from many other public figures. He understood that great events were made possible by the dedication of ordinary people working behind the scenes. Princess Anne was doing exactly what everyone who knew her would have expected. The Princess Royal was moving through the reception with a small notebook, making careful observations about every aspect of the day's events. She spoke quietly with the ceremony organizers, asking detailed questions about timing and logistics. Her goal was to learn from any small problems so that future royal events could be even better. The Princess Royal had a reputation for being incredibly well prepared and absolutely professional in everything she did. Palace staff members had come to rely on her attention to detail and her ability to spot potential problems before they became serious issues. Even during what should have been a celebration, she was thinking about how to improve things for next time. During the reception, Prince William and Princess Anne found themselves in a corner of the room engaged in a deep conversation that lasted for nearly half an hour. Other guests respectfully kept their distance, but could see that the two were having an important discussion. Palace insiders later revealed that Princess Anne was sharing insights from her decades of experience, while Prince William listened with the attention of a student learning from a master teacher. The Princess Royal was explaining some of the more subtle aspects of royal protocol that could only be learned through years of practice. She was also sharing stories about how different ceremonies in other countries were organized and what lessons could be learned from those experiences. Prince William asked thoughtful questions that showed he was serious about learning from his aunt's vast experience. One touching moment came when a very young page boy who had been part of the ceremony approached Prince William nervously. The child had been worried all day about making a mistake and was close to tears from the stress. The prince knelt down to the boy's level and spoke to him gently, explaining that he had done a perfect job and that everyone was proud of him. Princess Anne watched this interaction with visible approval. Later in the evening, Princess Anne was observed helping to coordinate the departure arrangements for some of the older guests who were tired after the long day. She personally escorted several elderly dignitaries to their cars and made sure they had everything they needed for their journey home. This kind of thoughtful attention to others was typical of the Princess Royal's approach to everything. The reception also revealed how much respect Prince William and Princess Anne had earned from world leaders and other distinguished guests. Throughout the evening, people approached them not just to pay their formal respects, but to engage in serious conversations about international affairs and charitable work. Both royals were clearly seen as substantial people whose opinions were valued and whose friendship was treasured. As the evening wound down, Prince William and Princess Anne were among the last to leave the reception rooms. They walked through the palace together, discussing the events of the day and planning for future engagements. Their conversation showed the deep mutual respect that had developed between them over the years and their shared commitment to serving the British people with dignity and dedication. Palace staff members who witnessed these behind-the-scenes moments came away with even greater admiration for both Prince William and Princess Anne. The way they had conducted themselves when they thought nobody was watching revealed the true depth of their character and their genuine commitment to their royal duties. As the sun set over London and the last of the coronation guests departed from Buckingham Palace, Prince William and Princess Anne finally had a few quiet moments to reflect on one of the most important days in recent British history. The palace was slowly returning to normal after the controlled chaos of hosting a major state ceremony. Staff members were beginning the enormous task of cleaning up, while the royal family gathered in one of the private sitting rooms. Prince William sat in a comfortable armchair, still wearing his ceremonial uniform, but with his jacket unbuttoned and his tie loosened. The day had been physically and emotionally exhausting, but also deeply satisfying. He had played his part in continuing traditions that stretched back over 1,000 years, while also helping to show the world that the British monarchy could adapt and remain relevant in the modern age. The Prince of Wales thought about all the people he had met during the day, from world leaders to ordinary citizens who had waited hours in the streets just to catch a glimpse of the royal procession. Each interaction had reminded him of the responsibility he carried, not just as a member of the royal family, but as someone who would one day be king himself. The weight of that future role felt both exciting and sobering. Princess Anne sat nearby, still looking perfectly composed despite the long day. The Princess Royal had changed into a simple dress, but maintained the same dignity and poise that had marked her behavior throughout all the public ceremonies. She was reviewing some notes she had made during the reception about improvements that could be made to future royal events. Even in relaxation, she was thinking about how to serve better. The two began talking about their favorite moments from the day. Prince William mentioned how moved he had been by the children in the crowds who had waved so enthusiastically during the carriage procession. Princess Anne smiled and said she had noticed the same thing. There was something about the pure joy of young people that made even the most formal occasions feel like celebrations rather than duties. They also discussed the international guests who had attended the ceremony and the conversations they had during the reception. Both agreed that events like the coronation served an important diplomatic purpose by bringing together leaders from around the world in a spirit of friendship and celebration. The soft power of the British monarchy was something that could not be measured, but was clearly valuable to the country. Princess Anne shared some observations about how the day had compared to other major royal ceremonies she had attended over the decades. She was pleased that everything had gone so smoothly, and that the British people had shown such enthusiasm for the celebration. The Princess Royal had seen public attitudes toward the monarchy change over the years, and was gratified that support remained strong. Prince William asked his aunt for advice about handling the increased attention that would come with his rising profile in the royal family. Princess Anne reminded him that the key was always to remember that royal duties were about serving others rather than being served. She explained that when you focused on helping people and supporting good causes, the personal challenges became much easier to handle. As they talked, both Prince William and Princess Anne kept returning to the theme of continuity and change. The coronation had perfectly demonstrated how ancient traditions could be preserved, while still allowing the monarchy to evolve with the times. The ceremony itself was essentially unchanged from centuries past, but the way it was presented to the world through television and social media was completely modern. The Princess Royal emphasized how important it was that the younger generation of royals understood both the history they were inheriting and the opportunities they had to make their own positive contributions. She had spent her entire adult life trying to use her position to help others, and hoped that Prince William and his children would continue that tradition of service. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of other family members who wanted to share their own thoughts about the day. The sitting room filled with quiet laughter and affectionate teasing as everyone began to relax after the formal requirements of the public ceremonies. It was clear that beneath all the titles and protocol, this was a family that genuinely cared about each other. As the evening grew later, Prince William and Princess Anne found themselves standing together at one of the tall windows looking out over the palace gardens. The crowds had long since dispersed and London was returning to its normal rhythm. But both knew that the day they had just experienced would be remembered for generations as a perfect example of British royal tradition at its finest. The legacy of this coronation day would be the demonstration that duty and service could be combined with genuine warmth and human connection. Prince William and Princess Anne had shown the world that the British royal family remained committed to the values that made the monarchy both relevant and beloved in the 21st century.